I think the environment is a little bit different.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of kids do look at the world and they look at what they're being told. And I like the conversations that we had about, you know, economic opportunity or being able to afford college or all these things. I didn't remember a lot of these conversations going around when I was growing up, and we did not have a lot of money and I was in rural Texas, but I always assumed I would go to college and have that opportunity. I did not feel overwhelming pressure to get as much college done when I was in high school so that I wouldn't have to pay as much money when I left. I could look at, the people saying, you can be whatever you want to be when you grow up wasn't a caveat with, except for all of these things that you might enjoy. So go do this thing that makes a lot of money. Like there was some of that, but it didn't seem as extreme as it does right now. I do feel like we're in an environment where a lot of kids do not feel like they have a lot of opportunity and choice in their future. We're seeing that happen economically too, where we're starting to see, my generation struggling to own houses or to, have the same economic opportunity that our parents had, things like that I've seen in a very real way. And it's not that there's no opportunity. It's just that, kids look at something like AI that can write an essay on any topic that they could imagine in like 2 seconds. And they worry about, whether or not the creative writing that they love is ever going to be something they can make a living at. And they're like, well, if this is happening right now and none of this was possible 5 years ago, in 10 years from now, when I graduate from high school, will there even be jobs? Those were things that I think kids reasonably wonder about right now that I never thought about. So they don't feel like they have control and ownership over their lives. They don't feel like they have autonomy, the ability to make meaningful choices that impact them and the environment around them.
So I agree with that. Let me jump in real quick. If you feel like you've walked into the middle of a conversation, friends, welcome to Ask Mike. Mike Lunny, our good friend Steven Cox, and we are going to talk about, when I got the notes, I'm like, string theory. That's what we're talking about today.
Not with me.
Just from the amount of my brain to go, wait, I need Steven to explain this to me.
Yeah.
I'm excited. We're going to be talking, as he's already begun, with self-determination. Is that the correct terminology?
Self-determination theory.
And the three facets of that and what that means and how that affects us as educators. So now I'll get back out of the way. I just want to make sure everybody was like, whoa, did I miss some of the... Nah, we had a long conversation before we got rolling here. But take it away again. I didn't mean to interrupt you. We're talking about autonomy with our young people as it affects self-determination.
Yeah, so let's back up just a little bit. So for a long time, most psychology and stuff was based on this idea of behaviorism. Behaviorism is punishment and rewards. And the research that proved all of that to be true is, you take a rat and you stick it inside of a cage and you can train the rat to go get the cheese because it really likes cheese. You can also train the rat to do things to avoid being injured or hurt. You electrocute the mouse in a certain spot, the mouse stops going to that spot of the maze anymore because it doesn't want to get electrocuted. And you can train mice to do the maze really fast. You can train them to do lots of behaviors because if the punishment or the reward is strong enough, it changes what they do. And basically what we did is we go, hey, this works great on rats in cages. Let's try it with all the children and employees and everybody, and
positive, negative reinforcement or punishment.
That's the idea. That's the idea. It's what would we say? We could say consequences and rewards, or the other terms would be punishments and bribes. And essentially, those are the same things. They're just different words for them.
Right.
And there's a lot of challenges with this. I'll start by saying that this is effective. You can get me to do a lot of things by properly punishing or rewarding me. If someone walks in this room right now with a baseball bat and tells me to do a TikTok dance, or they're going to hit me with the baseball bat, I'll do the TikTok dance right now. Whatever it is, I'll learn it. I'll do that. I'll avoid getting hit with a baseball bat. Same thing. If someone offers me $1 million to do it, well, that would change my life and my family's life. I would probably do that, right? And so we built all of these models for schools and for employers and all these things on this idea of behaviorism, of reward and punishment. And what we have found over time as a society, I think, is that these work for certain things, but they're really limited. So, for example, threatening me with that baseball bat might get me to do the dance, but it's not going to make me like it. It's not going to make me choose to do that when you walk away and there's no more baseball bat threatening me. It doesn't actually change my opinion towards whatever that thing is. And there's been interesting studies that also show that when you reward and punish people, it actually makes them less likely to like the activity. So I'll see if I can find the actual study, but I love talking about studies. But there was this study that basically took, and when I was in kindergarten, we had station time, right? Where you could go and you could choose what you do between all these different stations. So there's like the coloring station and the Lego station and the do a math worksheet station, very popular. Okay. And you would go pick what you wanted to do. And so there was a study that took 2 different classrooms, and they looked at all the kids that chose to go make art every day, that chose to draw pictures in color, that really enjoyed making art. And one class they left alone, which is always the class I want to be in when it comes to a study. Okay. The other class, they gave award certificates to all of the kids that made art that said, congratulations, you're a wonderful artist. Here's your award certificate. Okay. And then they just watched what the kids did the next week. And the kids that were awarded were much less likely to go make art the next week. Like they stopped, and why? You usually immediately think why. And I think of a few things. I think one is you created this endpoint where you're like, art was a task that could be completed and you did it. Here's your reward. You're right.
I finished the level.
Yes, that's exactly it. And also the big problem I find with punishments and rewards is that it always highlights a power imbalance. You can't reward or punish someone unless you have power over them. There has to be a power imbalance. My children cannot really reward or punish me, even though they have tried. They've attempted to bribe me. They've attempted to make me miserable. Most of the time, they do not succeed because there is a power imbalance. I have a lot of control over their life. And so I think as human beings, we're naturally kind of critical about people abusing their power dynamics in order to make us do something we don't want to do. And that's essentially what we're doing with bribes and punishments. Because if someone just does something, you don't have to bribe or punish them. They have to not want to do it in order for you to need to bribe or punish them. If they want to do it, they'll just do it, right?
Right.
So I think that on some level, we're all aware of that, and it colors things weird. I'll give you another example. If I walk up to you with a delicious-looking cheeseburger, and I say, I'll pay you $100 to eat this cheeseburger, you will probably be skeptical of the cheeseburger. Like I eat cheeseburgers for free. Why are they trying to pay me to do it? It must be awful. If they're giving me free pizza to do math must be terrible. It must be something I'd never want to do because they're giving me pizza in order to get me to do it. There's like all these deeper psychological things that even if the punishment or the reward in the short term makes us do something, I don't know if in the long term, we actually receive that benefit because we're very skeptical of the reason we did it. Now, I will say that there are things that I have been bribed or punished for that I did develop an intrinsic value for. I'm not saying that it's 100% foolproof that you can make someone hate something by bribing them or punishing them about it, but I'm saying it makes it more likely that they won't develop that intrinsic motivation. You're crowding it with the extrinsic motivation, creating all these other issues. So that's the challenge with behaviorism. And that's the challenges with reward and punishment. The other challenge, like I kind of mentioned with the baseball bat, is that once you when you stop giving the rewards, you stop punishing, most of the time you see the behavior go away. Because if they were doing it to avoid the punishment or to get the reward, when those things aren't around anymore, no
reason to do it. Yeah.
There's no reason to do it. That's the same reason that, I don't know that there's been a lot of research that shows that capital punishment is really great because people who are committing crimes generally don't think they'll get caught. They don't think they'll actually get punished. And so you lose a lot of the effect of the punishment by people thinking that they'll just be able to avoid it anyway, right? So there's so many challenges that make it an incomplete model. So in the 1970s, there are these researchers, Richard Ryan and Edward Deci, that come up with a theory, self-determination theory, to try to explain motivation better. Because we also noticed that, for example, some people are in that free zone making art every day and loving it, and some aren't. And what are the conditions that make it more or less likely that somebody will like doing something? And so they developed this theory. And in science, a theory is an idea that, could never be 100% proven. It's not like, this cell phone is a certain size and I can prove that. It's not that kind of thing. It's something that's more complicated. And then you develop bodies of research around it. So there's a ton of research around self-determination theory that has shown these things to be true over and over again. But when I talk to people, most people's experience tells them it's true too. Their idea was that every human being has psychological needs, just like physical needs of food, clothing, shelter. And no one disagrees about that. People go, yeah, if you don't eat food, you die. Yeah, if you don't drink water, you die. Yes, we need shelter from the elements or we'll die. We get all of that. With psychological needs, if you don't have these things met, then you psychologically die. Like you're not motivated, it messes up your life. And around activities, if you don't have your psychological needs met through the activities you're doing, you're very likely to not have motivation. Your motivation dies. And that's what this theory is. And so they narrowed it down to 3 psychological needs. And they're constantly testing this. People will come up with a need they look at, and either it doesn't ever seem to fit the test. So these are the 3 psychological needs. If you are a teacher, I think it will be obvious. And if you are a band director, I'm going to give you exact examples of these things. The first one is competence. We have a need as human beings to feel like we are capable of doing the things we're being asked to do. It doesn't mean that, whenever I first pick up a clarinet, I have to, sound like Sidney Bechet immediately, or name another clarinet player. It doesn't mean you have to do that, but you have to feel like you can improve and you can get better at it. And if you don't, you will not be motivated. So as a teacher, obviously, I've seen this a million times. The kid who really struggles, if they struggle long enough, they will quit. And also, if a kid struggles very long, there actually becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy where they don't see the improvement, and so they don't see a reason to invest effort, and they don't improve even faster, right?
I like how you put that.
Yeah, it becomes a more passionate failure whenever they get to the point where they don't see a point in the effort, and then you're sitting there going, "We'll just do it," and they're like, "I don't know, I've been doing this for like weeks now, and I've seen no changes. This instrument is impossible. Why did you hand me this one? Could I have one of those trumpets? It only has 3 buttons. It must be easier," right? And so that's competence. And we'll list all 3, and then we can go through them. The next one is relatedness, a sense of connection. Okay, so sense of connection would be, Mike, we call each other up just for fun sometimes. Like I appreciate you. You're a mentor for me. There are other people that I have ran into professionally that if they called, I would pretend like I didn't notice the number ring. Those people, we don't have a strong sense of relatedness. I'm not motivated to talk to them. If you are a marching band director and you take third quarter break and you look at who all the kids are hanging out with, and you see, somebody over there who, as soon as it's third quarter break, they go and hang out with a different group. Like they're hanging out, with a group of kids that are not inside the band. And then they come back and you're looking in the stands and there's their section. Then they're kind of off to the side a little bit. You see that lack of connection. And I can guarantee you that if that doesn't change, that kid will drop out of band of the semester, if not sooner. Because they don't feel connected. We need that human connection. We are social. Even people that are introverted and don't think they need it, this theory would say, actually, you do need it, and you're better when you get it. It just may be harder for you to meet that need, right? And I found that to be true. So the last one, and this is the one that I think is most challenging in the band world, is autonomy. It's challenging for a couple of reasons. Number one, it is said to be the most important of the 3 needs because if people's autonomy is met, usually their relatedness and competence is met. It turns out that by meeting autonomy, you usually meet the other thing. So that's part of the reason that it's the most important. The reason it's the most challenging is that you have to allow people to have meaningful choices. That's what autonomy means. It doesn't mean freedom. It doesn't mean a free-for-all. It doesn't mean, for a teacher that you walk into the classroom and say, do whatever you want, kids. It doesn't mean as an employer you go, there's no rules, show up whenever you want. It doesn't mean that. It means that you have meaningful control over your life and what you're doing. When you feel like you have no control and that you're just having to follow orders, your motivation tends to be very low. Like that's just it. And and again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't ever follow orders. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying we shouldn't ever give kids instructions they have to do. It's not what I'm saying at all. but I'm saying they should have meaningful choices within whatever frameworks we're doing. And so you see, I'm caveating autonomy a lot because I've had this conversation with people and what they imagine is total chaos. And what I imagine is high structure, high autonomy in most environments where, here's how everything is set up. But within this framework, you've got lots of choices that are meaningful. There's different ways you can approach tasks. There's different tasks you can do that lead to the same outcome. There's lots of ways to structure things so that people have choices and meaningful choices. But you also lead them in a direction of getting an education or fulfilling their duties at work, or for my children, growing up into wonderful adults, which are my goals for all of them. Yeah.
And I would also say, I think there's a real strong need in autonomy for people to feel like they have control over how they behave.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? That was my biggest cultural thing in my band program, was having students really feel like they have the discipline's not how I punish them. Discipline is how they internally decide to behave for the good of the group and the good of them. So I think that's a big part of autonomy. It's not, in my mind, it's not just the competence. It's not just the introvert versus the extrovert. It's, I have control over my behavior.
Yes.
And I might get punished, and I might get a reward, but that's not the big deciding factor. It's the culture of, I'm in this with a group and I need to behave a certain way. So I just wanted to kind of hear your thoughts on that, if that resonates with you.
Oh, it does big time. It does big time. I mentioned earlier that one of the challenges with capital punishment, and life in prison, all these things, that most people that are committing crimes, they're not expecting to get caught.
Correct.
It's either the heat of the moment or they think they're going to get away with it. And so the punishment isn't really salient to them in any way. Also, would I rather my kids don't murder people because they're afraid of punishment or because they think murder is bad?
That's the right thing.
What would I prefer? And for me, I would prefer people. And by the way, that's the reason that most people aren't murdering people, is that we as a society feel like murder is a pretty bad thing.
Yeah.
And so
we don't weigh the consequences. I don't sit and go, I think I'm going to murder that person, but I really don't want to go through the whole trial and the detectives and I just don't want to really be in prison. We don't go through that process. It's something that comes from within us, that we were raised, or our belief system is that we do not murder another person. So yeah, you're exactly right.
Well, so that's what we want for our students. As a music teacher, I want my kids to practice their instrument because it's cool, because playing an instrument is really life affirming, and it's wonderful to be a part of this group. And I want them to have all of these true reasons for doing it. I don't want them to practice because they're afraid that I might embarrass them, or they're afraid that they might get a bad grade and lose the credit for the class, or any of these other reasons, because those are terrible reasons to practice. And also, all those reasons go away when they leave. And me, I'm interested in lifelong musicianship. I want our society to have more music makers that make this a part of their lives, because I think it's worth it. And that means I avoid using things in my practice that are going to go away whenever the students leave. And everything that we do in school is built on behaviorism, just about. I would say, what would happen if you build the systems in school around self-determination theory, around meeting kids' psychological needs? As a teacher, when I started doing this, my results got way better. They got way better. And initially, there was a lot of trial and error, and there's a lot of ways that I'm still very not perfect, and I'm reminded of that constantly. But it's like its own craft of learning, how do I create conditions and engage students authentically? Because the other thing we're talking about is authenticity. When kids make choices about what they're doing, their choices tend to be authentic because it's coming from them. When I make choices, they might be authentic to me, but they're not necessarily authentic to the students. And so by bringing the kids in on the choice making, you wind up with a lot more authentic environment. And so, we can talk through nuts and bolts on some of this stuff in a minute, but I just, these three basic ideas. We want to create environments where people feel competent, where they feel connected in a positive way, and where they feel like they have meaningful choices. By the way, that's what I want at work. I don't want to go somewhere, this is why assembly line work is so psychologically difficult. To do the exact same thing over and over and over and over again for weeks with no change in pace, with nothing. That's really, really challenging work from a psychological standpoint, even if, despite whatever physical demands it might have, so there's also been places like that, though, where when people start talking to their workers and saying, hey, what are ways we can make this better? What are you noticing on the floor there as you're working? What do you need? And productivity gets better. Like the people that are actually doing the work also notice things that people higher up the chain don't know. This is with my students. I started really trying to bring in their opinions and make them feel safe to say things that I might not like. Okay. Which is really, really hard. It's really, really hard to do that. It's hard to collaborate with students because number one, they're crazy. Have you noticed like those, they don't have fully formed prefrontal cortexes yet, but they're also brilliant because they don't think about things the same way that we do. And so there are certain barriers that we imagine that they don't imagine. So there's a lot of value from this. And so one of the things you really want to do is perspective taking. You put yourself in the position of the students. So there's certain ways that I did this. One was, there were times that I was making decisions that were efficient for, the rehearsal or for the trip we were going on or whatever, but made the kids a little miserable. So that might be, we're going to take and we're going to leave at this time. We're all going to wear our bibbers on the bus. We're going to do this thing, and they were like, this is really uncomfortable and people are really annoyed by it. And, when the students felt okay telling me that, we looked for different solutions that a lot of times didn't change anything but minor little logistical things, but made everybody a lot less miserable. And then when they were less miserable, they were nicer to each other. We were more efficient overall just by making these little tweaks that I never would have seen if I hadn't been asking them or putting myself in their position and thinking about it from their side.
Can I jump in here real quick?
Yeah.
I do think, though, that, and Stephen, I think this may be somewhere on your horizon. It seems like part of that challenge is the students are saying, wait, are you manipulating me with this? Is this a trick? Is there a electric shock coming somewhere? If I say the
cheese,
thing,
there's the cheese.
And even the administration above you going, this is not the way this has always been done. So you got those dynamics, but I think you said it with the authenticity. And so what I'm getting at with my question here is the only way to achieve authenticity is to actually follow through and let them see over time that you really do want to know what they're thinking, as opposed to here's a quick experiment for this week and then we'll go right back to, because I grew up in more of a military form of marching band or band in general. There were definite authorities that said, this is what we're going to do. Hoorah, let's go. So the authenticity piece of that is what I'm getting back around to. Is there a way to convey that quickly, or is it simply trust me and you'll see that I'm being real about it?
Can I jump in on that?
Sure, Mike.
Yeah. I think for my student leadership, I had a packet that I went through this leadership training. And the most important question that was on there was, if you were the band director, what things would you change next year that you feel like would make the band program better? And how would you go about doing that? And probably I would guesstimate 90% of the changes I made in the last 19 years of my teaching came directly from students. And to answer your question more concisely, is you just have to be honest. The kids knew when I asked them that question, I read it out loud, and then they would write down their answers, and they could discuss it if they felt comfortable in the group, or they could come to me later, or they could just let me read the paper. But they knew that when I looked them in the eyes and said, if you were the band director, what would you do different next year to make this a better band program, and how would you go about doing that? It was everything like you said, like Stephen said, how we checked out uniforms, to how we loaded buses, to how we did sectionals when we had them in class, to how we took roll. And they were, you just had this hive mind of, like, in this case, 160 brains, figuring out how to do things better instead of me being the authoritarian. And I kind of got that idea from Greg Miller, who was my high school band director way back in the other millennia. But I remember it just because I grew up with a dad who's an Air Force sergeant. So, we made our bed a certain way. We were never beat or anything, but you did it with the four corners and you made your bed
Expectations,
exactly a
right.
certain way. And, but then all of a sudden Greg Miller would say something in band and go, and if any of y'all have any other idea how to do this better, just come see me after class. And I was like, whoa, I've never heard those words before.
Uh-huh.
No one's ever asked me my opinion. I always just assumed in band, if you got checked out your uniform, they never checked out, an opinion with it. You know what I mean? Is if they want your opinion, they're not even going to
They'll
ask
give it
for
to you.
They don't, they'll give it to me. So that was kind of my experience with it. It's about honesty, being able to look at the kids and go, what would you do better, to make this happen better?
Our goals for our students, I think, need to be bigger than for them to do what I say. Like, I think it has to be bigger than that, and so this is a really big challenge whenever you're talking about, the kid who's the uniform officer. What is better for them to have the experience of taking ownership and trying things in a different way that may or may not be more or less efficient, or for them to follow through on doing what you said? What's actually going to be a better lesson for them? I would argue that the first thing, them taking ownership and trying, when I started thinking, okay, I don't like the way they're doing this. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure they know that it's okay for them to try this. I'm going to make sure there's a boundary around it. So like if their thing is, well, instead of dry cleaning them, we're going to hang them off the back of the truck and drive through the sprinklers. I would say no to that. I would have a hard boundary there. But if their thing was, instead of having the line on this side of the room, I'm going to have it on this side of the room. And instead of using this thing, we're going to digitize it and do this. If they had all these ideas they were very excited about, then guess what? They're going to show up early to check out the uniforms. They're going to immediately often see their mistakes and adjust. And if I've got a good relationship with them, they'll take my feedback, but I have to be flexible enough to say it doesn't have to be done exactly the way that I would do it, and that there's a benefit to that too. There's a benefit to them taking the ownership to do it slightly different. You can't take ownership, by the way, without making some decisions. So that's part of that thing there. So you 100%, that's the situation there. And I think there are places all over, employers, schools, parents that are realizing this. And, we should have the space that students can be making decisions, and we should understand the benefit of them making those decisions, even whether they succeed or fail. And I think when people implement this, they find that they succeed way more often, or maybe even more than succeeding or failing. They actually didn't matter logistically at all. We were just comfortable with the way we were doing it, and this didn't change anything except for now we've got more ownership because the kids are doing it in a way that was more meaningful to them.
Yeah, and I think it pushes even further than the kids. We've lived the same life as far as, public school, band director, head director, whatever kind of thing. And how many times have you bit your tongue going, this probably isn't going to work, whether it's a staff member or whether it's a student, a drum major, whatever. But sometimes if it's within those boundaries, you just kind of bite your tongue and go, that's not how I would do it. But let them try it. And 90% of the time, we were right. 10% of the time, they were right. I find that a very interesting concept in the self-determination theory, that we even have to make our staff around us believe in that, just like that's what we want from our superintendent. We want the superintendent to say, here's the hard boundary. Mike, I want a band program. You do your thing. I trust you. You're competent in what you do, but here's the hard boundary. You can't just say we're going to Hawaii next week, and all of a sudden start raising funds. There's boundaries involved. So I find it just I know it can be really dry at times, but I find it a really exciting thought process about we're making people better people. And then if they do that, they'll play the horns for us.
So I think you guys are saying very positive things, but I'm going to throw this out there as well. I think it's important to state that at no point has anybody in this conversation said it diminishes you as the director of that group. It doesn't make you less. It actually builds the whole program, which I hope is the goal. And do you understand what I mean by that? I think a lot of people are afraid of losing authority or losing credibility. Quite the opposite.
Yeah, you're right. In fact, I would go as far as to say that there's only two emotions can be held in this situation. Either they fear you or they respect you. And if you're on top of them with a whip, they will fear you, and you can have a good band. I know really good bands that they're just whipped into, first divisions. You know what I mean? Every good note is beat out of them, in a quote loving way, I suppose, but they're an authoritarian, and the kids fear that teacher. They don't necessarily respect them, they fear them. But if you go the self-determination theory and you try to grow them as individuals, you're not giving up anything. What you're doing is gaining their respect because you're giving them respect. I know that sounds cliche, but it's a real common thing we forget about.
Well, and every band director has authority. You're the band director.
Yeah, they know you have it, so why prove it?
But while every band director has authority, not every band director is a leader. Like, those things are different.
Oh, Lord, yes. Yeah.
So I think that's the challenge. And, self-determination theory is about empowerment. It's not about authority, so it's about empowering the students to make decisions and to take ownership and to do these things. And one of the things that shifted for me was my goals, I think about whenever I first started teaching, like everybody, I wanted the kids to like me. That was real important for me. Now, I care less if they like me, but I 100% need them to know that I like them, that I care about them, and that they are important to me. That matters to me a lot. And they may or may not like me. I can't fix that. But they need to know I'm on their side, I'm fighting for them, and I like them. And it's actually more important. This is another study was showing, and I love this, that whether or not students liked the teacher didn't matter nearly as much in outcomes as if they thought the teacher liked them. And I really love that. Like, that's building up that relatedness. We're on the same team.
Yes.
You can't be on this again. And you look at your administrators. Who do I want to work for? Someone who micromanages my every move and gives me no choices. That says, these are the songs you're going to play. This is where all the performances you're going to be at. Or someone that goes, I believe in you. I trust you. Let me work with you. When there's challenges, we're going to talk about them and work it out. But, you're the band director. I'm the administrator. It's my job to support you. I'm the band director. You're the student. Here's all the things that we have to do that are non-negotiable. But my job is to support you and grow you as a musician and a young person, as a leader. And we're going to work together, not top down, but, all around. And that's a different kind of thing. And again, when people start thinking about this stuff, the first thing I would say is that the way to get into it is give the kids as much control as you can stand. Don't feel like because it's real easy to do the autonomy without the structure, see that fails, and then give up and become very authoritarian again.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, one of the mistakes I made is there were things I felt very strongly about or that we didn't have control over, that I gave the kids the choice thinking, oh, they're going to make the right choice, and then they made a choice that actually I couldn't stand by, and I hurt the relationship, right? And so, then it became, I'm constantly seeking feedback. I'm constantly trying to engage them in a positive way. I'm building up the relatedness. And then, here's where someone's brought something up, and I have to think to myself, is it possible for me to say yes to this? If it's possible for me to say yes, I'm going to try to say yes. Because what I did initially is when kids would come to me with ideas, I'd be like, no, that's not how we do it. No, that's, it'd be no because no was safe. And I started to go, is there a reason I can't say yes to this? Like a real reason, not just because I'm not sure, but is there a reason I can't say yes to this? And if I could say yes, we were going to say yes. And that really opened me up a lot to the students actually having some control, and then I started thinking more and more like, well, what do I have to control? What do I absolutely have to control, and what can I hand over to the kids? And then there were some things that I handed over to them that I'm like, wow, I never realized that kid could call the number on the copier and order the ink whenever we were running low. I never, and that they actually thought that was cool because they've never called a business on the phone and ordered ink before. And now that's part of the job. And I thought I had to do that. Okay, what about the trip planning? Can the kids look at a map and see where a restaurant is and figure out how many people are there? And I'm not going to let them do everything without me looking, but what if I let them do everything and I still have some veto power?
That's a perfect example, because I had two seniors each year that their job was to set up all our meals. So they wouldn't lie. They would call Roses in Midland and go, this is so-and-so, this is Joey Smith, representing the Wiley Pure Gold Marching Band. They're not saying they're a senior. They're saying they're representing the band, said, what are your meal plans that we could go with? We've got this many students. We'll be arriving at a certain time. They would do all that. Then they'd put it on my desk. And then I would call back later in the day to Roses, to the manager, said, hey, yeah, my representative has set all this up and I agree with all of this. Can you go ahead and can we confirm all this? So you're right. I had kids filling out bus forms. I mean, it's like Radar O'Reilly on MASH, if that dates you at all. They just stick all this on my desk and I'd read it. Yeah, that's when the buses need to leave. They figured out the trips. They knew how many miles. They knew it was take the miles and divide by 50, and that's the number of hours it takes a yellow dog to get there. They knew that. They knew every 2 hours. That was the size of our bladder of our band was every 2 hours. Yep. So we had to stop every 2 hours somewhere because we could not go further than 2 hours. And so it works.
This is what happens too. Then when people complain, like, oh man, why are we leaving so early? The kid who planned the trip goes, well, actually, the buses only go this fast. And we have to do a break every so often, so we have to take this alternate route so that we can hit this place that's big enough.
That's right.
It becomes this institutional knowledge where all the kids know this, and the complaints go way down about because they're like I remember getting a call from a parent who was so mad because we were going 40 minutes out of the way on this 3.5 hour trip in order to hit a large convenience store, right? So we're in rural Texas, and there's nowhere to go to the bathroom. And I had to explain that this trip was so long, we had to take a bathroom break. And if we stopped anywhere along that regular route that they could go in their car, and I had 120 people getting out of the bus to go to the bathroom at a convenience store with one bathroom, that we would spend 2 hours there, and that would put us way more behind schedule than if I just take this detour. And that parent was so upset. But as you build those institutional knowledges, as you explain it, that's the other thing too. I've got a great book. Hold on. Is it over here? I'm going to see if it's somewhere. I usually take it around places. It's called Supporting Students' Motivations, and it's like practical strategies built out of self-determination theory.
Cool. I'd love to read that.
Yeah, I'll definitely recommend it too. Yeah. It's a heavy read. Like someone needs to write a self-determination theory book that, there's a good one called Drive by Daniel Pink, but it's not really directed at teachers. We need, excuse me, like Dr. Wong does, self-determination theory.
Self-determination theory for dummies book.
Yeah. And as a dummy, I could qualify. Maybe I'll learn.
Me too.
But anyway, one of the things I talk about is how important it is to tell your students why you're doing things, to like actually do the reasons for it. And I find this to be really interesting because I think about the things that kids don't like. One of those things is warm-ups. Like a lot of kids don't like warm-ups because of the sameness. But whenever you talk to students and you go, why do we do lip slurs? Does anybody know why we're doing these? And, and they start talking about it. I go, yeah, it allows you to jump between the notes more easily. It helps you learn to target them like with a bow and arrow. Why are we doing scales? Well, we can use these to build technique. We can use these to improvise. And they have like the reason they're doing things. They're much more likely to say, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'm glad we're doing this versus why do they make me do this every day?
Yeah.
There's no question. But most people never explain why they're doing it.
I find that if we do explain all these things, the level of apprehension in the band goes down, and 90% of your problems are solved at lunchtime because all the band kids eat together.
Yes.
So someone will say, this is really stupid how we check out uniforms. And the person who does uniforms goes, no, there's a reason we do it this way. And you're exactly right. And all of a sudden that whole level of kind of energy kind of goes down and turns into positive energy. And I'll tell you a really good, funny story. Tim Edens at Hamilton. Okay, I had a kid who was planning our trip going to Waco. And he just took it upon himself. He thought, hey, this would be a cool idea. I think I can call the band director in Hamilton because it's halfway. Maybe their band parents can provide us a meal and we can use the restroom there. So he actually called Tim Edens without me knowing and said he was so-and-so representing the Wiley Pure Gold Band. And Tim was going, who are you? I know the staff at Wiley, and you're not a band director. Finally, the kid had to fess up. No, I'm a senior. I call on, and Tim thought that was the most hilarious thing. That this kid was like, "Yeah, we can pay $5 a meal, and we should arrive at about this. And coming back, could your parents provide a snack for $3 a lunch bag, and we'll stop back in about 1 a.m. And if a couple of parents can meet us, we can all use the restroom in Hamilton at your facility." And he just thought that was the funniest thing that this kid got caught.
Did he do it?
Yeah, he did it. Yeah. He agreed with the kids. Yeah, we'll do that.
It's fantastic. Like, they come up with things you wouldn't. And like, the thing about giving students autonomy is that when you need compliance, they're more likely to do it because they're going to be less overall jaded. You're going to have that relationship thing where they trust you, where they know that you care about what they think and what they do. And so, one of the things you can do if you get into this mode and students are giving a lot of feedback and they feel comfortable with that is you also talk about, here's the times where I just need absolute compliance. Okay. And I just need you to do everything I say without questioning it. Just because there's a lot of you. That's the thing in band. Like, there's a lot of you. Yeah. So here's the following things. When we are unloading and loading, anything we haven't talked about ahead of time, if we're in this high stress environment on the day of contest, if there's an emergency, like we have to evacuate the bus, we have to do this. These are times that we're going to go into hyper compliance mode, and I just need you to do everything that I say. There's, these moments of the rehearsal, we need hyper compliance. When it's over, let's talk about it, see what we want to do next time. Like, there's not a reason that you can't get the benefits of students being able to have that military precision along with an environment where they're making lots of meaningful choices. Again, high structure, high autonomy. So what that would look like is, we're going to do these drills on how to evacuate the bus, and we're going to zipper, as they tell us to get out of the bus. We're going to practice this. It's going to be high compliance. It's going to be, we know what to do. There's no questions, just go, and you practice that and they know. Yeah, I had a student that questioned everything we did. And this wasn't an environmental thing. This was an individual student thing where that's just what that student did all the time. And it was so frustrating because what the student would do is come up to me at the most inopportune moment to ask to do something that often came across as very selfish, without any rationale at all. And so we're in the middle of a thunderstorm. They've evacuated it. And this student is very insistent on going back and getting their things from the stadium. And I'm like, they've evacuated. You can't go, like, this is one of the 3 times I think in 14 years of teaching that I really raised my voice at someone. Cause I'm like, this is life or death. You turn around, you walk back in there, and that's a tough environment, but I could have prepped them for that better. I look back at any of those moments and I go, that kid was having the strong emotional response to their instrument that their parents had just bought them being left out in the rain. And they were terrified of consequences at home. They were terrified of losing this thing that was really valuable to them, and I could have prepped them in such a way that 2 things happened. Number one, they might have even grabbed it and brought it with them because we would have had time to do that, given when we evacuated, but also they would have understood that we were going to take care of them. If that instrument got ruined, I was going to make sure that they were going to have another instrument and that their life was more important. And that's what we were actually talking about, and so I think, again, autonomy without structure is a recipe for disaster. Autonomy with structure is a recipe for extreme success, especially in terms of growing the students as people, which should be our goal. I found a thing I wanted to share with you that I really like. It's a continuum of motivation. Okay, and so this goes from low motivation, which is low autonomy, to high motivation, which is high autonomy. Okay, and so on the extreme of low motivation is amotivated. A student is they just will not do it. Okay, this is the kid whose mom made him sign up for band. And from the very moment he got in, he goes, I'm not going to try this. I'm not going to do this. And then everybody got better than him. And so now he's got a real chip on his shoulder about it. And, we did required band. Pardon me. We did required band in 6th grade at Eastland for the whole time I was there. And boy, we could do a whole podcast on that someday. Decide you need to back. But, the kid whose family says this is stupid. You shouldn't have to do this. I can't believe the school's making you do this. Band is stupid. I would have never done band. Oh my God, they're making you play an instrument, and they walk in with all these vibes. And sometimes you win those kids over, which is almost more heartbreaking because they're not there the next semester as soon as it's not required because their parents don't support it. But a lot of, sometimes they come in, it's just very, very difficult to get that student to do anything. Amotivated. They don't feel like they have any control. They're being made to do it. So they're not wrong. They didn't have any control.
That's right.
So then external would be right next to motivation. External is your compliance in order to get rewards or avoid punishment. I'm writing this essay so I don't get a bad grade. I don't like writing the essay. I'm not interested in the topic. The only reason I'm doing this is to get the grade. And we assume in education, well, they're going to get some benefit out of doing that. And we get focused on if we make them do the right things, they'll get the right outcomes. But, the people that I know that are good writers, they view writing as a pleasure, not as a chore. And so, they take it or leave it. I was told to do it. That's external. Now, introjected is the next one up from that. Introjected is self-control, ego involvement. It's like, I'm doing this because I'm afraid that if I don't do it, that makes me a bad person. I've been told by my family so much that I have to do this that now I'm making myself do it, but it's all out of fear or self-judgment or ego involvement. This can be a very powerful motivation, but it's very easy to shatter. These, kids who do this, like we are an award-winning band and I'm in this award-winning band and we have to do all of this. And then they don't win the award. Emotion, like boom. Those are the kids that, if they get third place at state marching contest after getting first place, drop out of the band and have a huge problem with everybody. And, it's this ego involvement. It's not that they actually like doing the activity. It's that they've taken all the extrinsic reward and punishment and made it a part of their ego. Identified, this is getting to be more autonomous. This is where someone goes, I'm doing this because it's going to help me get something I want. Like I'm practicing scales because it's going to help me do technique. I don't like practicing scales, but I do like playing my instrument and getting technique, so I'm going to do it. They're choosing to do it because it's going to help them. This is why I take out the trash. I take out the trash because I want to have an empty trash can so I can fill it back up again. Okay? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to take it out. I don't enjoy taking out the trash. I don't look forward to it. It's not an intrinsic motivation, but it's a higher quality extrinsic motivation. So from here on, these are things I actually want in the band. Below this, I don't really care about it because it doesn't really help me. And I don't think it helps the kids. Not long-term. Short-term, maybe, but long-term. Yeah. So that is, they have a personal importance for it. I personally believe that this is important. Integrated would be synthesis with self. This would be, I'm a practicer because that's who I am. I'm a guy who practices my instruments, and that's the kind of person that I want to be. Don't always like practicing, but I show up and I do the work. Okay. That would be integrated. So identified is I have a reason for doing this that I care about. Integrated is I'm doing this because I'm the kind of person who does this.
That's who I am.
Yeah, it's who I am. It's who I am. And this is different than introjected because it's not that I'm afraid that, failure is going to destroy or this. That's just like, I'm somebody who practices, this is congruent with my identity and it's something that I choose to do. And then intrinsic is I like doing it. I enjoy sitting down and playing my instrument. It gives me actual joy. It feels good to do it. So I want things to be on that side. I want it to be more autonomous. So that's where I'm trying to increase these three things, the autonomy, the competence, and the relatedness. And again, a lot of things that we do for behaviorism undermine these things. So like there's practices I stopped doing. I stopped doing playing test in front of everybody. Like I just stopped doing it. And the reason we do this is, symphony auditions. We're going to go and we're going to perform and all this stuff. Playing by yourself in front of everybody in a high stakes environment where you're being evaluated is not only terrifying, but if you fail, it's very high stakes, like emotionally, socially, all of these things. And if my goal is to push out the kids that don't play well, it's a very good system. But if my goal is to take and grow all of the students, then there's other ways to evaluate them that doesn't create super high stakes around it. That doesn't result in them being super embarrassed or feeling like they're letting everybody down. And again, those are powerful motivations, but they're fragile. Yeah. And so that's not what I want. I want strong motivation. So I'm not saying don't evaluate kids. I'm saying that, that doesn't have to be in front of everybody by themselves.
We had a weekly, in first of my career, weekly chair test in beginner band. So if you had your trumpet class, you went down the row, and I found a couple of things happen. One is it pigeonholed the kids where the top four knew they were the top four, and the bottom four knew they were the bottom four, and everyone in the middle didn't really care anymore. They just did that. So I kind of quit. I quit doing that, and I found I had my best classes when the kids just simply played, and they would play in front of the class, but there was no chair placement. I just filled out the rubric sheet and I gave it to them. And then they would, and I had one little kid who came up and I thought he was mad at first. And he goes, Mr. Lay, I can't believe you gave me that grade. And I go, well, what's wrong? He said, well, it's a 75. Said the last one was a 70. I went up 5 whole points. Said if I keep going up 5 whole points, then I'm going to be a really good trumpet player by the end of the year. Where in the previous system, he would have been shamed.
Yeah.
Yeah, he'd have been shamed as like, okay, you're 34th chair, out of 35 trumpet players. And so it really did work. And I like the idea of doing the evaluations not in front of people, but at least if you don't have that logistical ability, at least don't make it a high stakes chair placement. And in fact, we'd have first and second parts for contest and beginner band. So on one tune, half the trumpets played first part, the other tune, that half played second part. So everyone played first part on one tune and second part on another, and we just kind of rotated the rows, but it really does make a difference. I wanted to ask you one thing. You're talking about competence and relatedness. I found a real strong correlation between kids who work hard to be competent because they want to relate to the other kids in the band. It's not a shame thing. They just want to pull their weight. They don't necessarily want to be first chair. I mean, my son was a good trumpet player. He was never first chair, but he pulled his weight and he liked being in the band program. At least I think he did. At least that's where he met his wife. So I'm hoping that's he had an extrinsic motivation. Okay.
Very
to be
powerful extrinsic motivation.
Yes, very powerful extrinsic motivation. But yeah, what do you think in terms of that? Because to me, those two tie in more to each other than autonomy does. They're all important, but
they're all interrelated. But let me make an argument again for autonomy meeting the other needs.
Okay.
Okay. So whenever students have some control over like choosing what they're being assessed on. So like, for example, if you're using a method book, one of the things that you can do is you can have a list of, here's all of the lines, we're all starting on the first 6 together. Now, you can go at your own pace. So you're ready to do this when you're ready to do that. If you want to jump ahead and you want to play off one of these lines, it's way harder. You can do that too. By getting that control, by giving the autonomy, the choice, I'm still assessing them. I'm still giving them feedback. But a kid who needs a little more time has a little more time. They're going to be more competent because they're taking the time they need. This kid that is bored with what we're doing is going to jump ahead to this really hard line over here, and they're going to feel more competent because they're able to make that choice.
Okay.
Whereas if you're holding people back and saying it's got to be this way, it's got to be my way, it's got to be exactly like this.
Everyone's doing line 21 this week.
That's exactly right. And the goal is everybody progresses, everybody gets better, and you try not to make a big deal out of, that kind of thing. That's why I really like recorded assessments where the kids have all the time they want to make a recording of their best effort on the thing. And then you give them feedback. Like, I love that. Now I'm getting to do it until I have a take I really like. And, there's a lot of kids, that's a real motivation to practice because they want it to be really good, right?
Yeah.
So, whenever students have some control over their challenge level, then they tend to feel more competent. They don't get pushed too far out of their comfort zone, and they tend to actually pick things that are more challenging over time than what you would pick, because it's not high risk anymore, right?
Right.
I think that's a big thing. I think too, for the relatedness, if I'm giving them control, they appreciate that. Like whenever I'm being real strict about it and they're feeling very forced to meet a certain challenge level that is either too easy or too hard for them, now the relationship is strained because they're feeling that pressure that's being put on them, makes it harder for me to connect and inspire and encourage, which are those higher forms of motivation. So that's why I argue that autonomy, if you're meeting autonomy, you're very likely to meet the other two needs.
Okay.
That flexibility too, again, builds relatedness. It makes them feel more, the kid who is following your instructions on doing the uniform closet but messes up is going to feel incompetent. The kid that's empowered, if any of it's going right, now, this was my idea, I feel like I can do this, right? So anyway, that would be my argument. I do agree that for some kids, I think I need to play well in order to pull my weight. That's a little bit of the ego involvement side of it.
Okay.
And I think that's better than doing it for a punishment or reward. I think it's, but what I still think that's not exactly the motivation that I want my students to have is I want to play good so I don't let my friends down. Yeah, that makes me worried for a couple reasons. One, as soon as they're not in an ensemble, they're not going to play their instrument anymore. So I really want to be moving them towards actually enjoying playing the instrument. That's the direction that I want that motivation to go to. And also that makes both those things kind of fragile. Because here's what I've noticed, and this is especially true in highly competitive environments, is there are reasons that kids reach different landmarks at different times. Some kids have physical challenges. Some people have like dyslexia and things that slows them down. All these kids can grow and get better, but they're going to go at different speeds. And so that kid who's like, I need to be good so I don't let my friends down, that also has dyslexia and has to go slower, a lot of times they wind up in a bit of trouble with their friends. It hurts the relatedness because they're comparing themselves in that way. They're not like, I'm getting better and I'm working hard. They're like, I don't play as good as them, so I'm not valued and I can't be their friend. That's the thing I worry about. Now, that usually doesn't happen unless you have a high stakes environment. So, for example, create a system where if somebody's out of step, you don't get to go on the biggest trip of your life to state marching contest. Well, the kids are going to be pretty rough on that kid who's out of step.
Yeah.
They don't know what's wrong with that kid. If that kid's not trying hard, if they, have a physical impediment, if they are rhythmically challenged and working as hard as they can, all they know is that kid is not in step. That kid isn't meeting that same standard. And the kids always jump to, they're not trying hard enough. They're not working hard enough. I had a brilliant student who, and it's my fault. Like, I think that a lot of this was pressures that I put on them, right? You're trying to get those results because that's what the system that we're in. Whenever we're just getting ready for a concert or, contest is over and we're just getting ready for a halftime show, the kids are having fun. They're still working hard, but they don't get real mad about that kid that's out of step. That kid can just participate and keep getting better. And so I think the exact thing that you're talking about is a big challenge in high stakes environments.
Yeah. That makes sense. I was thinking also more in terms of you mentioned the introvert in the band program. They want to be more competent at what they do because that's their means of being part of a big group, even though they don't feel like they have a lot of great social skills of just sitting down and talking with people. But we all know that those kids that are in your band program that hardly ever say a word to anybody. And I've had kids come through my program that unless I initiated the conversation, I don't think they ever came up and said anything. And I thought they hated band. And then years later, I find out that band was the best thing in their life or whatever. They just loved it. So yeah, but I appreciate your point on that. That does make a lot of sense that if we get into a high stakes environment where state marching or death, you know what I mean, kind of thing, that it's kids start to be really hard on each other. And yeah, I see your point. That was really well spoken.
There's an argument that when those things happen, that you're doing something wrong in the way that you compete. And I actually think, and the more that I was involved in those environments, I realized that actually these are the natural consequences of the competition. When things are zero sum, it really does make other people obstacles instead of allies.
Yeah.
And I don't have a taste for that. I do think that a lot of programs work really hard to override that, but I would guarantee you at that lunch table and in the bus, the same conversations are happening. And it's just how quickly do they move on from that? So that's where I am, where when you talk about state marching contest, when you talk about just getting a rating at contest, when you talk about grades, all of those things are extrinsic motivators. And some of them we may be stuck with, some of them we may be not. We did just make up all of this stuff. We did just invent it all. We are, and it can feel intractable, but there's ways to, minimize the extrinsic motivators. And getting rid of extrinsic motivators is not sufficient for students to be motivated. In fact, if you walk into your band hall tomorrow and go, hey, we're not doing marching contest next year, you're going to have a bunch of kids drop out because, they've been built up to really believe in that and want to do that. And they're going to feel like they're being blindsided and it's being forced on them. It's going to feel amotivating. And again, like I said, it's not sufficient. Like if right now you've built a program around extrinsic motivators and you just stop doing that and you don't actually build up relatedness and competence and autonomy in your classroom, then it's probably going to be a disaster, but there's a lot of downsides that come with extrinsic motivators. The good programs, they try to minimize them. They really do. They go, no matter win or lose, it's just that we worked hard, or it's just this, or it's just that, or whatever else. Or people will say competitions don't matter and then still participate. It's hard to make those two arguments at all. It's hard to put a carrot out in front of someone and say, don't care about that carrot. That carrot isn't important. It's just a carrot, that like you can't really do that. So anyway, there's big challenges there. I went to an extreme in my last program, the one I started here in San Antonio, the very different kind of program, but I got rid of grades. I got rid of contests. I pretty much got rid of trips too. I removed all the extrinsic motivators, and I had to be sneaky about the way that I did that. So like we still graded, but the students picked their own grades. They did self-assessments. I still gave them feedback constantly. You can't be in a room playing an instrument and me not get to you with feedback, although I tried to do a better job of inviting myself into their practice. Like, hey, do you mind if I give you some feedback right now? But I went to a real extreme, and I saw extremely cool results. I saw people take off. I saw kids who would never have been involved in music practicing an instrument every single day. I saw a band hall of 50 or 60 people every single day after school with none of those requirements that were coming and practicing. And so I do not believe for a moment that these extrinsic motivators are necessary for quality. I don't believe that they're necessary for advocacy, but I do believe that that belief is countercultural and requires a lot of nuance. And had I, not spent so long in the system trying to understand how to build up people doing the self-motivation, doing self-determination theory, I don't know if I would have been successful actually getting those results out of those kids while also taking away the extrinsic motivators.
Yeah, really cool.
All right, Steven. For those of us who are like, man, we are heavily extrinsic. How do I start the shift? Do I just find one thing that I say, and this is going to sound negative the way I say it, so I apologize. You can find a better way to say it. If this doesn't work, it's not going to kill my program. Or if this doesn't work, then, well, it didn't work, and I'll try to find something else. But do you just look for the one thing that you can work this in, and then that worked, and everybody goes, hey, cool. Okay, what's the next thing until it just kind of starts to snowball and becomes a culture? Is that a reasonable thought?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to introduce these things in subtle ways. So I would say we already talked about some really good ones, which is to start perspective taking and seeking feedback from the students. This does open you up in a lot of ways. And then I would say start creating some opportunities for students to take ownership and make decisions about things you don't care about.
Right. That's a better way to say what I was going to say.
Well, things that you don't, that maybe they care about, maybe they don't, but just you can start introducing things that way. Like that's the way I think to get your foot in the water. From a rehearsal standpoint, I say this every time I speak anywhere. The biggest change for me was saying, what do you hear, instead of telling them what the problem was. So actually trying to engage them psychologically in the rehearsal, thinking about that. Same thing. There are so many musical decisions you can invite students in on, like musicality. Like, do you guys think we should crescendo or decrescendo here? And the sneaky part about this is you're talking to like 100 people. So half of them will say crescendo, half of them will say decrescendo. You try it both ways, and then you collectively pick one. You don't have to vote. You just, everybody say, okay, well, it sounds like a lot of us want a crescendo here. Let's try to crescendo, So you're being a little sneaky, but more and more, if it doesn't matter, because there are lots of places where it does not matter, where the fact that you're being musical at all is above and beyond what many people are going to do at that next event. Or it's a concert and it's just about the kids. It's not about pleasing anybody other than them and their parents, where these decisions don't matter very much. And the kids just making a decision, whether it is the artistically perfect one or not, is so powerful in having them start to take ownership of those things too. So I think that's where you start doing it at the margins. I would say to be very careful about not opening up them to a decision that you're going to have to override, so you can limit what the possible outcomes are. So you can say, it's really hot on Friday. Do you guys think we should go ahead and show up in uniforms, or we should show up in our band t-shirts and jeans? Let's say you were already thinking you would do band t-shirts and jeans. It was already in your mind you might do that. You give them those options, see what they want to do, go with what they want. All of that's great. But you didn't say, hey, what do you guys want to wear on Friday? And they go, what if we wear Halloween costumes in December? And you're like, oh, no, I have to back this up because I opened that to what? Like, you can limit what the choice set is, because making a choice with a limited choice set is still making a choice. Again, you don't have to go wildly open-ended. In fact, I would not suggest starting that way because you're very likely to back yourself into a corner. And
Right.
when it comes to these things, I want people to be successful because I think if they have a little bit of success with the student ownership side, that they'll be bought in. They'll be ready to do it. Like the further I stepped into this, the more I liked it, even when it didn't wind up going right. And any change you make, band directors know this, any change you make, there are challenges when you first do it, just because people are uncomfortable with it. So, things don't go perfectly when you make any change, whether you make the decision or the students. So you keep all of that in mind. I think those are really safe ways to start inviting the students into helping make the decisions about the program. Again, there's benefits. There's huge benefits to doing this. And that's why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I think it makes the kids better people and it makes the program a better place to be. And that's what I've seen. Like, I don't regret. The only thing that I regret about this is when I could have let the students have more choice or more impact and I overrode it unnecessarily. I
was going next is at some point, it seems like there's going to be a place where you have to override something. Do you just simply say, all right, guys, we tried it, didn't work, so we're going back to this? Or do you know it's not going to work and you say, I appreciate your responses, but that's not going to work?
But like I said, it is important and valuable to have hard boundaries. So if we're talking about, hey, I'm going to ride in the back of the trailer with all the instruments instead of on the bus, no, that's not happening. I'm sorry, but that is unsafe and that's beyond what we can acceptably do. And I'm the adult here and I'm going to say that. Okay. Now, there are ways, and this is to do this, that are a lot more autonomy supportive. So, for example, someone says, I want to ride in the back of the trailer with the instruments. And I go, well, have you considered that there might be any safety issues with that?
Have you thought?
And yeah. And before I say no, I'm asking them to think about it. Like, if I can get them to come to the same conclusion that I was coming to through giving them reasonable information or asking them good questions, and if it's too highly directive, then it might feel manipulative. But you can just honestly say, well, let's think through this decision. You can say, hey, here's the things that I immediately notice. And again, with something as extreme as something that's super unsafe, I don't mind you shutting that down and being like, hey, man, that's just not going to work. I'll get fired. There won't be a band director anymore. It's going to be a whole thing. So we can't do that. And I'm trying to let him down. Yeah.
In the process, there's going to be another kid go, really?
Probably.
That doesn't sound safe.
Sometimes like a lot of times when you talk to students, like honestly talk to them and don't just order them around, like they're pretty smart. They're going to figure out a lot of stuff. And that's what I do when I give feedback too. That's where you go, hey, how did you feel about your intonation? And they go, well, actually, I kind of thought I was out of tune on these notes. Well, that's way better than me going, you're out of tune on these notes.
I agree.
So like, as you go through this process, like they get quicker, and you build an institutional knowledge in a program, which is pretty cool. And so, yeah, a bunch of kids are going to shut down. You can't ride in the trailer. You'll get killed. And that'll be a whole thing. So you don't even ask that question. You're like, a lot of the work will start doing itself because they're engaged. They're engaged with it. They're not just thinking about it that one moment we were having the conversation. They care about it.
Authenticity. Yeah.
It's authenticity. That's exactly right.
Okay, cool. Mike, you got anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say one more thing with autonomy. I think one of the coolest musical moments in conducting a band and teaching a band was when I would just stop and just tell the bands that you're playing exactly what's written on the page with the dynamics as told to us by the composer. And then on top of that, you're trying to read my mind of what that Mr. Lunny wants it to sound like. Said, how about we play this particular section of this ballad, and I just want you to let each note lead to the next note, and you decide as individuals and just figure out, does that need to crescendo on that one note? Does that need to decrescendo? Is this where I need to breathe? And I said, and the boundary was, and if you do something really drastic, then you're going to hear from me. I'm going to say, don't do that. And it was absolutely amazing the amount of musicality that an ensemble can produce when they get out from under that, this is my baton and I'm Mr. Lunny and this is how we do it. And this is how, Gustav Holst said this is supposed to go. This is how it's written. And it was absolutely amazing. So if you can get that culture built up, just like Steven's talking about, it's really exciting and it's really musical. And I get chances, like I went to Waco to judge a contest and I had a couple of my old students. that have their own band programs now. And it's so cool to watch them come in and do the sight reading process. And at one time they were in our beginner band program at Wiley, so it's that coolness of knowing that this really did mean something to them. They made choices. They became a better musician, and they decided that they wanted to do what their directors did for a living. And not that every kid has to do that, but this sounds selfish maybe, but that's very gratifying that someone sees worth in what you did past the point of just music, but as far as being a better person. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there.
Well, I think that we have to consider what our long-term goals are. And I do think the system, our very contest-heavy system in Texas, often obscures those long-term goals, because the goal is when the contests get the rating. And that really is a fog over everything we do that allows us to excuse some weird behavior in order to get that rating sometimes. And certainly none of us are actually keeping track of how many of our kids keep making music when they leave. Like, there's no data other than those things that we've created, so I think that there's a big challenge there that will tend to obscure this, because that short-term goal gets in the way of the long-term goal. And me, like, I became more comfortable sacrificing short-term goals for long-term goals. I wish Wall Street would do the same thing. Like, there's big old challenges with those types of things. And I don't think it's that way. I don't think it is give students choices and fail at contest, or, be an authoritarian and win. Like, I don't think it's that way. But I do think that, it's much easier when we're not in a high stakes environment to take risk, obviously, right?
Yes.
So the other thing that I might encourage people to do is, if you're thinking about this, and you just finished contest, now's a good time to, experiment with your student autonomy. When all you're worried about is the kids, their families, and the next time you're in front of your community, like the real stuff that matters, empower the kids, because that is going to shine through to those parents and to those kids. The parents do not care if you're a first or second division band at the concert you're doing. If the music sounds pretty good to them, they're pretty happy.
Yeah. They are.
They're pretty happy. They don't care about that, but they do care about if the kid comes back home and they're excited about what you're doing. They do care about if the kid is becoming more responsible and engaged. Like, all I want for my children is that they love something, that they love an activity. That's more than anything. What's more important to me than their grades, more important than anything, is that they have things in their life that they are passionate about. That's what your parents care about too, and that's what the students care about, obviously. And so, your next spring concert, like, if you got time to order music, like, ask the kids what they want to play. Say, hey, we normally play grade 2s. Here's the J.W. Pepper catalog. Go see if you can find one that you're excited about, that you can get all your friends. Have them consensus build. Pick out 2 or 3. Do a student choice concert if you want to. Like, they'll pick music you would never think of. You'll explore. You'll be excited. Like, if you want to take a big swing, do that. Do a student-led sectionals where the students split up into groups and you give them an itinerary of what to work on and they try to do it themselves. Because it won't go perfect. And if it's, right before a contest, that's going to freak you out. And so you'll step back. But now maybe you have the space to do that experimenting. That's what I want for our kids is that opportunity to really engage with something. The other thing I would say too is I'm real big on creative music making. So integrating just a little bit of improvisation into your warm up where, you learn to play a scale and then everybody at the same time just mix up the notes in that scale and see if you can make a cool melody. You don't have to expose people. Please don't, if your kids have never improvised, go, let's do a swing chart and just let them start experimenting with notes. That's choice making. That's autonomy. Hand your kids some staff paper and say, hey, try to write it down. Now they're composing. There's lots of things you can do. Again, another great topic for a podcast is creative music making in the band hall. But there are so many ways that you can engage them that are just fun, that are enjoyable, and that are legitimately growing them in ways that maybe they haven't been growing lately. So anyway, that's my argument for some student autonomy today.
Cool. Very cool. Awesome stuff, man. Awesome stuff.
What a great visit, Stephen. I really appreciate you taking time once again to sit down with us, and maybe we just kind of stretch our thought processes and go, there are ways. There are things we can do. Because I'm a routine guy, I don't always stop and go, is this the best way? I don't know. It's just the way that I've always
It's the way.
It,
I'm kind of that way.
so appreciate it. Mike, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you introducing me to Steven through this. It's just a fun
He is a force of
conversation.
nature.
Well, you know, in a world, again, where I sit and go, how long should we talk? When I'm sitting and talking with you guys and Steven in particular, I typically don't even think about how long we've been talking. And that's
Your
a constant.
sister's going to love that.
So, man, I hope things go well for you this spring. I hope your family's healthy and successful. Mike, I'll see you again next week. But for now, I appreciate you both. Y'all have a blessed week. All right.
Hey, thank you guys. Appreciate both of you.
Hey, thank you guys.